Hi, my name is Joseph Delleva, and I want to thank you for taking the time to review my original contribution to CI 5091, Capstone Experience for Curriculum and Instruction through the American College of Education. My original contribution is Assessment Literacy and Backwards Design, an Essential Connection. So here's my agenda and what I hope for you to take away and learn in my presentation. So today I'll be covering what is assessment literacy and why it's important, what is backwards design and how does it work, how to align assessments to the standards, types of assessment, evaluating assessments, common mistakes that are made in backwards design, and then I'll do a quick review of all the things I go through in my presentation at the end. So what is assessment literacy? Well, the purpose of assessment is to gather reliable information that measures student learning accurately. Because this information is used to guide instructional decisions at the school level, at a district level, and most importantly in the individual classrooms. It also informs funding for schools and for programs, as well as helps to evaluate the overall educational effectiveness of schools and classrooms. So what is assessment literacy? Assessment literacy is the ability to understand how assessments are designed, what kinds of information they provide, and how that information should be interpreted and used by the different stakeholders. It requires recognizing who will use the data, what they need to get from the data, and how they will apply it. Effective assessment literacy also involves balancing the purposes of statewide, district, and classroom assessments to ensure they collectively support student learning. This is why it's important all stakeholders are literate in assessment. So why does assessment literacy matter? Well, it matters for everybody, all the stakeholders like I mentioned before, but specifically I'm going to look at students and teachers. So for the students it matters because it helps them to understand how they can contribute to their own learning through understanding what they're being assessed. It also helps them by understanding what the goal of their learning is, and it helps them to build confidence by learning about their learning progress and giving them agency in what they're doing in the classroom. It's important for teachers to know this because if they know it, they can better fit their instruction into the balance of different assessment systems. They'll know the purpose of their assessment, which makes it easier to align it with their instruction or align their instruction with the assessment, and whether or not that assessment matches their learning targets. By being assessment literate, they can also create quality and effective assessments that are equitable and better meet the learning targets they set and avoid bias, so they're better meeting the needs of their students. It also allows them to make better adjustments in their instruction from day to day to make sure they're making true progress towards those learning goals for their students. So what is backwards design? Backward design is also known as understanding by design. This is the process of designing a unit of learning by flipping the traditional format from beginning with the activities and then creating assessments and then writing learning goals to match those activities, to beginning with the idea of taking a standard, either content or skill-based standard, and creating the learning targets first. Then designing assessments that match those learning targets so you know how to best measure the progress students have made towards those objectives, and then completing the process by designing instruction that best supports those assessments and the learning goals. Backwards design has 3 steps, and those 3 stages are identify the desired results. In this step, the teacher decides what students should know, what they should understand, and what they should be able to do. Here, the teacher will create objectives guided by Bloom's taxonomy and decide what skills and contents students need from this learning to help them not just in their classroom, but also outside of the content area they're in and in real-life situations. The teacher then chooses enduring understandings or big ideas that should be carried by the student beyond the classroom as well. So these are the big ideas, not the little day-to-day details that you'd see in instruction, but really what they really want them to take from it outside of the classroom. The second step of backwards design is to determine acceptable evidence. In this step, the teacher designs assessments that measure how well they have met the learning targets from step 1, how well the students have met that target. The teachers create assessments that accurately measure if students meet the goals and show evidence of learning. And these assessments should be fair and unbiased and consistent with how they measure student learning. The final step of backward design is plan learning experiences and instruction. In this step, teachers plan their content. They decide what instructional strategies they will use to help their students prepare for the assessments created in step 2, and they will choose choose instructional strategies that best support those learning objectives and learning targets that they created in step 1 as well. So this step includes choosing activities, readings, videos, the things that they will use to help the students access the curriculum and learn the material. Step 6 is aligning the assessment to the standards. Aligning assessment to the standards is a key part of backward design. When creating this alignment, it is important to create learning goals that target specific skills and knowledge that are measurable. These goals should be more specific than the broader unit objectives, but still align with and support the goals of the learning objectives. So for an example, if one of my learning objectives for the unit on Andrew Jackson's say was students should be able to identify at least 2 changes in voting laws in the early 1800s and how they affected voter participation in the United States election process, citing evidence from the assigned readings, then a corresponding assessment objective might be students will match a specific change in the early 1800s voting laws to its direct effect on the U.S. elections. So you can see how it supports that. It's a little bit more specific, but it still supports the main objective created for the unit. Okay, there are different types of assessments. I'm going to go through some of these assessments that help make sure students are progressing towards their target. Each one has a different purpose. The first one is the diagnostic assessment, which are used before the beginning of a unit. They're used to help identify students' prior knowledge and identify any skill gaps that might exist before a teacher begins instruction. So this helps to guide instruction and planning to make sure you can fill in those gaps. Next is formative assessment, which is used to monitor learning during a unit or lesson and inform adjustments that the teacher may need to make in their instruction. This includes activities like think, pair, and share, or exit tickets, where teachers can measure what a student has learned in a day's lesson or just through the week as well. Next is summative assessment. This is used to measure mastery at the end of a unit, lesson, or course, and it shows if the learning targets were met. These are more traditional types of assessments like multiple choice tests. And when we look at traditional assessments, most of them are criterion referenced assessments, which are used to measure student performance against specific standards rather than comparing students to one another. This is in contrast to authentic or alternative assessments, which evaluate a student's ability to apply what they've learned through performance-based tasks like projects or giving a class presentation or creating a portfolio to show how their work and learning has progressed over time. Okay, to make sure that the assessment works properly, we need to evaluate that. And so when evaluating the quality of an assessment, it is important to consider validity, reliability, fairness, and practicality. Validity is whether or not the assessment accurately measures the content and skill it claims to test. It should show whether or not students understand and can apply what they have learned. Reliability is the idea that the assessment will consistently show the same or similar results whenever it is given under the same or similar conditions. Fairness is the idea that the assessment avoids bias and that all students participating in the assessment can demonstrate learning regardless of their background. And lastly, practicality is the determination of whether or not the assessment can effectively be administered, scored, and whether the data from it can be used to measure learning and guide instruction. While there are other factors to consider, these are the key ideas to consider before using assessment with your students. Common mistakes and how to avoid them. Because backwards design is a move away from the traditional method of classroom instruction, it is easy to make mistakes at each of the different steps or stages. These are some of the most common mistakes that people make when implementing backwards design. In step 1, the 2 biggest mistakes are oversimplified objectives and trying to cover all content equally. When writing objectives, it is important to make sure they address more than just recall or remember, and that these assessments are focusing on higher learning levels, as well as being specific and measurable. It is also important that the teacher focuses on the enduring understandings rather than trying to assess every single little detail from their curriculum. So for example, knowing why the Battle of Gettysburg is more important than knowing the dates and individual generals that participated. In step 2, the most common mistakes include focusing on summative assessment over formative, which often leads to the mistake of not aligning assessment to the skills or content of the unit objectives. While there are many ways to avoid these mistakes, one way is to focus on various forms of formative assessments to measure the goals daily, such as exit tickets or think pair shares, and create alternative assessments rather than relying on summative multiple choice type exams that often do not properly address the objectives created for the unit. And the last one, in step 3, the activities often do not match the needs of the students in meeting the goals of the objectives. One way to avoid this is to make sure that you are differentiating all the content that you create so that there's a greater focus on engagement and keeping the students motivated. So key takeaways are, 1, that assessment literacy is essential for all stakeholders, not just students and teachers, but administration, community members as well, in order for assessment to really do what it's meant to do. Number 2, backwards design begins with creating objectives. So you start by looking at the standards and determining what it is you want your students to learn, then making those assessments to measure whether or not they've learned them, and then building instruction to support that assessment and those objectives that you've created. Number 3, aligning assessment with the standards is important to make sure that these assessments are valid, that they are reliable, that they're fair and bias-free, and that the learning is meaningful for the students. Number 4, it's important to have multiple assessment strategies if you want to properly support the growth of your students and collect stronger data to measure whether or not they're learning. Number 5 is that you should evaluate the assessments for validity, for their reliability, for fairness, and practicality to make the best instructional decisions for your school or classroom. And finally, it's important to avoid common mistakes by focusing on the enduring understandings, by using more formative assessment, and making sure you are differentiating your instruction for your students. So I want to say thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking a moment to watch my presentation, and I hope that you found it educational and useful.